This is the 3D VIEW-MASTER story of Tarzan of the Apes. As the little barkentine tacked out of Freetown Harbour, John Clayton, Lord Greystoke, stared over her stern at the receding South African landscape with mixed feelings. He was pleased at the trust the Foreign Office had placed in him in his new assignment in British West Africa, but apprehensive at the thought of his wife bearing their first child in that wild land. Even the ship is only half civilized, he thought to himself, glancing about at the surly ruffians who composed her crew, and the full-tempered officers who drove them to their work. Lord Greystoke's fears proved well-founded. Just a few days out, as they beat up along the African coast, the crew mutinied, killing the ship's officers. The same fate apparently awaited Lord Greystoke, the Lady Alice, and their unborn child. But the leader of the mutiny, whose life the English nobleman had saved earlier in the trip, decreed that they were not to be harmed, but were to be put ashore at a deserted spot where they could not spread the tale of the crew's criminal actions. At the first break in the surf that foamed on the deserted, inhospitable shores, the ship was brought into a tiny bay. Boats were lowered away, and a young couple soon found themselves gazing at the ship's sails dipping below the horizon. Far from his manor home in England, John Clayton built a rude shelter of boughs for his bride. It was here that his son and heir, the future lord, was born a few days later. VIEW-MASTER Reel 1. Picture 1. Though used to a far gentler life, Lord Greystoke was a brave and resourceful man. With the few tools left them by the ship's crew, he cleared a small patch of jungle land and painfully constructed a tiny cabin for his family. With their meager supply of food, augmented by fruit and game from the jungle, the family hopefully awaited rescue, unaware of the tiny, cruel eyes that peered at them from the jungle's edge. Little did they realize that they had unwillingly trespassed on the domain of Kerchak, king of the apes. Picture 2. Kerchak held his leader's post through fear, not only of his tremendous strength, but of a misshapen brain that led him periodically to fits of uncontrolled violence, when he threatened destruction of any living thing, even members of his own tribe. During one such seizure, he had set savagely upon Kala, a gentle female ape bearing her young infant on her back. Kala had leaped frantically through the trees to escape, but her baby had lost its grip and fallen to its death. Kala retrieved the broken body later and carried it mournfully with her. Kerchak had broodingly watched the strange occupants of the tiny hut for days, bitterly resenting their intrusion, but with a bully's cowardice, unwilling to attack openly. Finally, in a careless moment, Lord Greystoke left the cabin door ajar, and Kershak led his tribe stealthily forward and then leaped to attack. Unable to reach a weapon, Lord Greystoke and his wife died with merciful quickness. But their child was to see a different fate. Hearing a familiar wail, Carla dropped her own dead child into the grip and scooped up the babe for her own. Picture 3. Booklet, Carla's mate, could not understand her fierce attraction to this puny, hairless creature. Why, an ape at this child's age would be scrambling through the trees, getting its own food. This Tarzan, as Carla had named him, could barely walk. But Carla defended her new child not only from Booklet, but from Kerchak himself. And so Tarzan grew under Carla's guidance and learned not only to walk and run, but to swim through trees, to hunt food, and to speak the languages of the jungle. Tantor the elephant became his friend. Numa, the mighty lion, he taunted from a safe tree. Picture 4. As he grew, it became apparent to the tribe that Tarzan was not one of them, though he was accepted into their midst. A muscular giant compared to other boys of his age, Tarzan was yet smaller and weaker than even the young apes. But his clever mind made him more than their equal. With a rope that he had twisted from thin vines, he became the mischievous tormentor of grouchy old Booklet, endlessly catching him in cleverly laid traps and howling him bellowing into the trees before scampering to safety. Picture 5. Roaming freely over the tribe's area, Tarzan had long since discovered the tiny cabin that still stood by the bay. The door had blown shut shortly after the horrible scene it had witnessed years ago, however. And though he was drawn back to it again and again, Tarzan had never gained entry. He had peered through the barred windows, even clambered over the roof and tried to fit himself down the chimney. Then one day, when Tarzan was in his early teens, his clever fingers finally solved the crude latch devised by Lord Greystoke, and the door creaked open. Picture 6. The hut held all sorts of mysterious wonders for Tarzan's curious mind, but nothing so fascinating as the books which had been among his parents' baggage, especially those that had been brought for his own schooling. He stared in wonder at the pictures and the mysterious little bugs that accompanied them. Then he found pencils and carefully copied the bugs. Tarzan returned again and again, and though the process took years, gradually discovered the connection between the pictures and the words. He could not speak a syllable of the language, but he could, after a fashion, read and even laboriously write English. He eagerly struggled through every book he could find. one alone divide his best efforts, the diary of his father, which through a whim Lord Greystoke had kept in French. Picture 7. With the books and other treasures of his cabin to occupy his questioning mind, Tarzan's life with the apes was full and happy, but a native uprising far beyond the hills, which guarded the shoreline, was to change his life forever. In a futile battle against encroaching civilization, a tribe was almost wiped out. The survivors retreated farther and farther into the unknown jungle, until at last one of their scouts entered Kerchak's domain. As luck would have it, he stumbled upon Kala and felled the gentle ape with a poison-tipped arrow. Discovering his mother's body, Tarzan hurtled through the trees, followed the scent of the unknown creature who had committed this terrible act. Easily passing his earthbound quarry, Tarzan crouched on a limb over the trail. His rope sailed silently down, and the killing was revenged. VIEW-MASTER Reel 2. Picture 8. Tarzan eagerly examined the first man he could remember seeing and quickly appropriated the dead warrior's bow and arrows. Though he had seen these weapons pictured in his books, he had never given them much thought until he had seen what the tiny shaft had done to his huge mother. With his mighty strength and lightning reflexes, Tarzan soon mastered the bow. He decided to put it to first use on the ape's most dreaded enemy, Numa the lion. With a jungle hunter's patience, Tarzan waited by a game trail for Numa to come. When he appeared, Tarzan rose from the brush with a bull ape's cry of challenge, and as Numa leaped his powerful arms, sent an arrow deep into the tawny chest. Picture 9. Bursting with pride, Tarzan hoisted Numa's carcass to his shoulders and hurried back to his tribe. "Look," he told the assembled apes. "Look upon the work of Tarzan. Tarzan has killed Numa. No more will Numa slay our young or stalk us as we hunt. Tarzan has slain our enemy. Tarzan is the mightiest hunter of the jungle." As he spoke these words, Tarzan's eyes locked with those of Kerchak, now burning with envy and hatred. Picture 10. With a choked roar that shook the jungle, the maddened Kerchak leaped upon Tarzan, his fangs searching for the ape-man's jugular. While the others apes fled in terror from this battle of the giants, Tarzan called upon his every resource to keep Kerchak at bay. Tarzan knew that even his great strength could not match that Kerchak, but his superior mind and his shining knife might prove equal. A mighty, open-hand blow by Kerchak opened Tarzan's scalp. The ape's teeth tore at him again and again, but Tarzan's long knife was striking deeper and deeper at the shaggy body until, finally, The keen blade pierced Kerchak's heart, and the king crumbled to the earth. Picture 11. Tarzan of the Apes placed his foot upon the neck of his vanquished foe. The victory cry of the great apes rang out over the jungle, wakening and frightening all within hearing. Sheetah, the leopard, on her nightly hunt, felt the hair on her back rise at the weird sound and decided that her hunger might be more easily satisfied in another part of the jungle. The apes crept down from their safe hiding places to greet and crown the new regent. Tarzan was now king of the apes. Picture 12. The apes welcomed Tarzan's fair and wise rule, and the tribe lived peacefully. Tarzan, still shorn-eyed, often alone to the little cabin to study the books and to ponder on his mysterious attachment to this strange place. Then one day his studies were interrupted. A ship entered the little bay. The books had told him of the existence of such things. But with a jungle beast's caution, Tarzan fled to the trees to see what these strange creatures would do. As he examined the group landing from a small boat, Tarzan's heart leaped with an excitement he could not understand. The native he killed to avenge Kala had been the first man he had seen, and so it was easy to identify the rough sailors in spite of their lighter skin. Even the curious little figure in a dark coat and tall hat, so strange to the tropics, even in Tarzan's eyes, he correctly classed as another man. But another figure climbed from the boat. There, her golden hair, gleaming in the sun, was a girl. Picture 13. Though he could not realize it, of course, Tarzan was witnessing a fantastic reenactment of history. Another couple was being marooned in this deserted cove, just as his parents had been years before. This time the victims were Professor Archimedes, Q. Porter, and daughter Jane. The professor had found, between the leaves of a musty old book, a map showing the location of a treasure buried since the days of Spanish pirates. Chartering a boat, the professor had found a great chest of gold, only to have it stolen by the ship's crew, who now proposed to abandon him and his daughter so that no word of the crime could reach the authorities. But now an unforeseen event foiled the thieves' plans. As they were about to put to sea, smoke was sighted by a lookout, and a British warship came into view. Not wishing to be caught with the evidence of their crime, the crew lowered a boat and returned to the shore, out of sight of their former captives, but not out of sight of Tarzan, who watched as they buried the treasure chest. Picture 14. Mystified by all this strange activity, Tarzan returned to the cabin to find the girl who excited him so, anxiously calling at the jungle's edge for her father, who was nowhere to be seen. In truth, the good professor was a dreamy scholar, often lost in the world of books. Now, even though he had just been robbed of his treasure, cast up on a deserted jungle shore, and left to die, he had wandered up the beach, deep in an ancient manuscript. Still without revealing himself, Tarzan determined to help the girl and set out on the father's trail. As he followed, he realized that the professor was also being trailed by Sabur, the lioness. Raising her head, Tarzan reached down to snatch the bemused teacher from Saber's grasp. Completely befuddled by the sudden appearance of Tarzan, the professor had to be led back to the cabin on the end of a string like a puppy. VIEW-MASTER Reel 3, Picture 15. As he came in view of the cabin, Tarzan witnessed a sight that set his blood aflame. Chained in the clutches of one of the great apes. It was Terkos, a young ape, jealous of this white-skinned interloper who had become king of the apes. His tiny brain formed a connection between these two fair-skinned creatures and decided that if he feared Tarzan's might, he could revenge himself on this defenseless female who was like Tarzan. Tarzan set out in pursuit of Terkos and his captive. Picture 16. Flying through the limbs of the forest giants, the ape-man soon came upon the spoor of the frightened Terkos. Seeing tiny signs invisible to you or me, he followed the ape's trail doggedly. Soon his quarry came in sight, and Tarzan roared the ape challenge, realizing that he could never escape from Tarzan through the trees while carrying his burden. Terkos dropped quickly to the jungle floor. There he rudely tossed Jane into the brush and turned to challenge Tarzan. Picture 17. Angered as never before at the thought of what Terkos might do to the girl, Tarzan flew at the ape, his deadly knife flashing, but Terkos, with the wisdom of his years, knew of the power of the shining blade. Snatching a broken limb from the ground, he delivered a smashing blow at Tarzan's upraised arm, and the knife went flying into the tangled brush. Without a weapon now to counter Terkos' strength, Tarzan knew that his intelligence and dexterity would be his, and the girl's only salvation. Parrying the ape's crushing blows, Tarzan grappled with Terkos, trying to avoid the deadly fangs while seeking the ape's throat with his own hands. Locked in combat, the two crashed to the jungle floor, rolling and thrashing, each seeking a deadly grip, for death alone could end this battle. Jane, struck dumb with terror by her abduction, could only stare in helpless awe at the sudden appearance of a half-naked giant whose only language was the blood-curdling cry of the ape. Suddenly Tarzan found himself on Terkos' broad back. With a wrestler's instinct, he wound his sinewy arms beneath the ape's shoulders and clasped his mighty hands behind the wide neck. His emotions adding to his own powerful strength, Tarzan slowly bent the shaggy head forward until, with a loud crack, the ape's neck snapped. Picture 18. Again Tarzan's cry of victory rang out over the jungle, and at its horrifying sound, Jane fainted. When she awoke, she found herself high above the jungle floor, in Tarzan's leafy bower. The ape man, who moments before had been killing an ape with all the ferocity of a jungle beast, was now shyly offering her food. Charmed now by his gentleness, Jane tried to thank Tarzan for saving her life, but the fair giant indicated that he could not understand her words. Then he peeled away a large slice of bark from the tree, dipped the twig into the juice of some of the fruit he had brought, and carefully printed his name. Displaying his work to an astounded Jane, he offered her his pen and paper, telling her with gestures that while he could not speak her language, he could read and write it. Picture 19. Searching for words Tarzan could understand, Jane plied him with questions. Who was he? How did he come to live in the jungle? Who were his parents? Laboriously, Tarzan framed his answers, which only left Jane more mystified than before. He was Tarzan, son of Kala and a white ape, whom he had never seen but had heard of from his mother. He was the mightiest hunter of the jungle and king of the apes. Then it was Tarzan's turn to pose the questions, and Jane tried to tell of their adventures in terms Tarzan could follow. Ships, guns, treasure, all these were just words to Tarzan, but he was perfectly content just to be with Jane, to hear her laugh, to watch her graceful movements. Finally, as the day came to an end, Jane asked if Tarzan could lead her back to her father. With a sigh, Tarzan lightly took Jane into his arms and set out through the trees. At the cabin, Jane's father, shocked into reality by his daughter's adventure, welcomed them warmly. After Jane had told of Tarzan's rescue and of what she knew of his story, the jungle man indicated that he must leave for a short time, but that he would come again soon. Then, smiling mysteriously, he swung into the trees and was gone. Picture 20. Returning to the spot where the villainous crew had buried the treasure, Tarzan uncovered the chest once more. Though 4 husky seamen had been needed to carry it ashore, Tarzan swung it lightly to his shoulder and set out to return the gold to its discoverer. Though he knew nothing of money, Tarzan realized from their tree-top conversation that Jane wanted her father to have it, and what Jane wanted, Jane would get. Back at the cabin, the professor and Jane, fascinated by Tarzan's story and by the cabin itself, began to examine its contents. The pitiful skeletons told of sudden, tragic and death. The remains of fine clothing and books of culture, amid the rude handmade utensils, related that the couple who had dwelt here had not freely chosen such a life. Bit by bit, the sad story of the hut's former occupants began to unfold, especially when the professor, who could read French, came upon Lord Greystoke's diary. Picture 21. By the time Tarzan returned with the treasure, The porters had a story to tell their benefactor. The professor translated the diary's sad tale, and Jane printed it out for Tarzan's eager eyes. A locket, which Tarzan had admired but never opened, was unlocked to reveal photographs of his mother and father, whose resemblance to their son was easy to see. The tiny skeleton in the crib had confused them until the professor had noticed that it was no a human skull, but that of a young ape. After years of believing himself the child of Carla, Tarzan learned that he was indeed a man, and an English lord as well, though he understood that not at all. Though Tarzan's brain reeled at the fantastic news the day had brought, and he was not at all sure that it was all good news, as he gazed at Jane, all that mattered was that he was a man and she was a woman. Just over the horizon, the flight of the criminal crew had been halted by a shell across their vessel's bow from the British cruiser. Under questioning, they poured out the story of the theft and the couple they had left behind to die. And so another ship came into the cove by Tarzan's little cabin on that eventful day. And Tarzan of the Apes entered a new world, in some ways more fraught with danger and excitement than the darkest of jungle.